You're listening to Rally DNA.
Now, those rally fans are getting pretty fed up with seeing the Audis and the Peugeots win everything. So this year there's a new British supercar with a great chance of beating the world. It's an opportunity of restoring the dominance that Britain last held in the sport in the 60s, the great days of the Mini.
Hello and welcome back to Rally DNA for episode 8 of season 1. I'm Killian Cronin, joined as ever by the Gravel Crew's Mr. Jamie Arkle. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Killian.
And before I introduce this week's guest, I should provide maybe a little background. In 1980, two men came together to lay the foundation for a new car intended to compete at the very forefront of rallying at the time. Patrick Head, chief designer at Williams Grand Prix Engineering, was looking for a new project outside their usual realm of Formula One, which at the time was going through a little bit of a somewhat turbulent patch politically, and Williams were looking for other potential sources of revenue. Meanwhile, Austin Rover, who at this time had no current works rallying program since the TR7 V8 had wrapped up, did have some funding available to put towards their next project and were on the lookout for someone to design and engineer such a vehicle. After a meeting between Head and John Davenport, who was Austin Rover's motorsport director, Williams were given the go-ahead to produce a design under the name of the Austin Rover Metro Very High Performance Derivative. Thankfully, this would later be renamed in its final form to what we now know as the MG Metro 6R4. This was February 1981. To do this, Austin Rover and Williams needed a crack team of individuals to get this project rolling and ready to compete in the harsh conditions of a rally stage would present. Today, we're talking to one of those crack team, Mr. Ian Anderson, who was part of Williams at the time. Welcome along, Ian, and thanks for giving up your time to talk to us.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Ian, would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in motorsport?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I did my apprenticeship at National Gas Turbine Research Establishment, which was a military establishment looking into jet engine research. I finished my apprenticeship, and the pay scales, obviously to do with government, are not very good. So I decided to head off into the wide world, see what was out there. I ended up a few little jobs, but I ended up working for Gulf Research Racing, which was just at the end of where they were racing the Porsches, 917s, and then they were building their own cars, the Mirages. So I stayed there for 2.5 years and did a couple of Le Mans, and then I saw an advert for Formula One, which was Fittipaldi at the time. I went there, stayed there for a while. Didn't get me very excited, I must admit. I left. I saw an advert about 6 months later for a job at Frank Williams, and I saw that Patrick Head was going to be working with Frank, whereas previously working with Frank was a bit dicey, really. You never knew if you were going to get paid, but and I was going to work there at the one time, and at that particular time I was trying to get a mortgage, and the mortgage advisor said, well, it wouldn't be a good idea because you need to keep your payments up every month. So anyway, as it transpired, I saw that Patrick was going to be working with Frank, and I thought, well, that's a good basis. I applied and got a job there. And that was 1978, at the beginning of 78. About a couple of months in, I ended up being chief mechanic, because the chief mechanic who was there at the time vanished, disappeared. I think the drink got the better of him, but anyway, he went. And it was left. I appeared to be the only one with enough information or knowledge or experience. So I ended up being chief mechanic. We were running the 06, which was a good car, which was Patrick Head's first car he designed himself with Neil Oatley. But it was a little bit fragile. And then he did a copy of the Lotus 72, which turned out to be very, very, very good. Had a couple of little problems, electrical problems early on with it, and because it was late, we missed out on winning the championship that year, not by much. But 1980, well, we pretty much blitzed it then. The car was extremely reliable. We had no problem winning the drivers and the constructors championship. So that was good. But at the end of 1980, I really had enough of Formula One, because in those days there was so much traveling, so much testing. You didn't have much time at home. So I was married, we had a daughter. Decided I didn't really want to do any more traveling. I know Frank and Patrick tried to persuade me with money, but that didn't work either. So I decided that's it. I was going to retire from Formula One, especially on the road. Patrick said he didn't think there was anything for me to do at Didcot at that time. So I said, okay, fair enough. I don't mind. I'll find something will turn up. I'll find another job, sort of thing. And then it was only a couple of weeks later, he actually came to me and said, we're doing a project, Metro 6R4. Do you fancy doing that? So, okay, right. Now, when someone says that to you, you immediately think, oh, well, this could be interesting. We have a large group to build it. But in actual fact, it was only 4 of us. And a huge amount has been written about the early days of the 6R4. There's John Piper, there was myself, and the other chap, the designer. The designer, Brian O'Rourke, he was the guy who did all the structure. Now, he's an incredibly clever guy, and Patrick recruited him when he was out in America, when we were out in America racing. And I think he worked for I think it's some military company. So I don't quite know what Brian thought when he turned up at Williams in Didcot. He ended up at the porter cabin out the back of the factory with John Piper. So he'd come from somewhere pretty exotic to somewhere that was about as basic as you could get. But the 2 of them were rapidly working away, trying to produce a structure, and John Piper was doing all the mechanical side and the gearbox and the final drive systems. And myself and another chap called Derek Jones, we were working away trying to make a facility that we could build this car. So we had to go out and buy a lot of equipment so we could just actually start putting it together. Surface table, we had to buy a surface table. Now I went up to a company up in Sheffield to look for a surface table, because we needed a big surface table to build this car, because we need to be able to work off a datum so we knew where everything was. So I found a surface table up there. It was the bleakest place I'd ever been to. It had 50-gallon oil drums with fires burning in it and all these guys. It's like in the middle of the Arctic. It was terrible. But I found a decent surface table and bought it. I think we paid about £3,000 for it. And I remember it cost £7,000 to get it down from there down to Didcot, and a crane hire to get it into the factory. But we got it in, and then from there we built an overhead crane. We went out and we bought spot welder, bought other equipment as well. And then by then, Brian had come up with a scheme, which was basically a space frame chassis with the body panels attached to it, which was incredibly stiff. And by the time all the body panels had been put on there, which a lot of them we had to make handmade, made an incredibly torsional, stiff car. Which was what they really wanted for a rally car.
At this point, was it still, this is the initial design being the front engine that Austin Rover had asked for?
John, I don't quite know what John Davenport had in mind at the time. We do know that it was a pretty clandestine operation he was running, because he hadn't actually told the people in power of Rich Leyland, what he was doing. So it was pretty much he was getting this thing done. He had some money to do it, but he didn't tell anybody what he was actually doing. So he thought that if put the engine in the front, he was thinking along the lines of TR7, I suppose, and cars that they've been used to. But I know for a fact that Patrick said, "Oh, you must be joking. That wouldn't be any good. It has to be four-wheel drive. It has to be mid-engine, and we have to build, the running gear to suit it, the gearbox, the final drive system to the front and to the back, and it needed a decent engine." So he asked what the engine was going to be. I don't really know what happened, and I know David Wood was involved, to design an engine. But initially, they had this Rover V8 with the 2 cylinders cut off it, and that appeared probably 6 months later, I suppose, after we started. That's what they had. That's what we were going to have to work with. John Piper, he did the gearbox. He did the step-off drive for the FF viscous clutch. Did a great job of that. Brilliant. And all the bits. He had the castings all done. It was all assembled in our sub-assembly department with some work from British Leyland guys who came over from Abingdon. Basically, the shell was done as best we could. All the running gear was fitted. The engine was fitted. At that time, it was a plain-looking car. It looked a bit like a Metro. It didn't look like the bewinged monster that appeared later. That was the idea. Was it was supposed to look like a Metro, but the more you got into it, the more you realised that it's never going to look like a Metro. Not really. We had to stretch the wheelbase a bit to get it all in, really. So, and not long after the car had been finished, Michelin said that, Brian O'Rourke had based everything around, I think it was a 16-inch tyre, but they wanted to go to a bigger tyre, especially for rough surfaces, gravel. So the strut top mounts all had to be changed. They had to be beefed up so you could get the suspension travel, because you couldn't get enough before. So anyway, so that was all put together, and they went testing with it. Tony Pond was pretty impressed with it. I must admit, I had a ride in it. It was frightening the life out of me. Going around the test track, there was a lot of G-force there. Then they found that the front struts didn't work properly. They were jamming up when it was getting loaded, so they had to be remade, redesigned. That was done, came back, and then they were doing another test, and I think Tony Pond got it a bit too sideways and ended up in the ditch. Well, it ran through the ditch, and it was covered in mud anyway. So that was its first accident, I think. So from then on, we had to build 2 more because they wanted 3 cars. So we built 2 more prototypes, and from there, really, the cars went to Abingdon, and then I think they sent one up to Longbridge. Longbridge.
Would have been Longbridge for construction, yeah.
Yeah, they sent them up there to actually productionise them, and by that point, quite a few things had changed. They didn't have a steel roof; they had an aluminium roof, and realised that they needed to have better cooling. And by then, I think the engine was online. The Wood's engine was done, which proved pretty good, but did have some issues. And it wasn't until Cliff Humphreys really later on he sorted out the engine to make it produce the horsepower, because it was a bit unreliable. And that, in a nutshell, that's basically it, really. The car evolved. Group B didn't last very long. but the Metro 6R4 is still out there, still winning rallies. So it's pretty amazing, really, considering that it's 40 years old.
I think, I mean, the engine is to me is one of the most enigmatic aspects of the entire 6R4 story, because, I mean, we all know that the initial idea was for Austin Rover to go their own way with a naturally aspirated engine to, counteract the problems of, lag measured in ice ages and controllability and everything else. But, delving back into that period, there seems to have been quite a lot of confusion about which engine the car would eventually run, because of course we eventually got the 6R, the 4-valve V6 made by David Wood, but before that there was the chop down one that you mentioned, which was effectively a Sean Rover V8. But I believe, and I could be wrong, there was also talk about using the Williams Honda connection to perhaps form the basis of the MG Metro 4 engine being the same as the one that Honda used for its F2 2-litre V6. Do you know anything about that?
I think there was a bit of discussion. I must admit it probably was discussed for various reasons. Maybe they decided that, I don't know, there must have been something that stopped them going that route. Yeah, I think you're quite right. I've sort of forgotten about that in the midst of time, but whether or not, I don't know, there must have been something political going on in the background or something with Honda, I should imagine. Could have been an ideal candidate, but that certainly didn't happen. Maybe the fact that the engine needed, the bespoke sump on it to get the step off. For the 4-wheel drive, maybe there was something in the design or something, or working with people on the other side of the world can be a bit awkward. Especially
People who
at that time, it was telexes.
And let's face it, Japanese engineers, again, particularly back then, had a reputation of being quite steadfast and perhaps stubborn in their own thinking, and not amenable to outside influence. And I can imagine that perhaps played a role as well.
Yes. I mean, later on in the Formula One side of things, it took a bit of a while to get them used to sort of the British way of doing things. But they adapted quite quickly. Some of the young engineers they had in the drawing office at the time were pretty good, providing you told them exactly what you wanted. But they always referred back to their hierarchy, because that's the way they worked. They couldn't jump in and say, look, let's do this. They had to go back to their main man and pass it through him, and it slowed all the process down. And then, of course, what happened later on, Honda wanted more and more involvement, and effectively they wanted to be, I think, buy into Williams Formula One, and told Frank that if we didn't, they'd take their engine away. So Frank basically told them, yeah, clear off.
not for the first time.
And they took it to McLaren. So
I mean, given all that, it's amazing that David Wood's engine, which I believe was developed in, I've heard 11 months is the figure, from drawing board to first fire up. And I mean, we can talk, and I'm sure we will do, about its appetite for cam belts and things. But when it was working, it made the power, and it was, had a huge rev range and sounded like nothing else on earth. But it's a fair old thing to get done in comfortably less than a year, even back then, I'd imagine.
Oh, I'd say so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially, I don't know where he went to get that done. Maybe it was Ricardo or something like that. I'm not too sure about that, but getting anything done via British Leyland would have been a bit of a nightmare, really. Like I say, a lot of this was all done clandestinely, and I had just as an insight into some of the things that went on. Davenport gave me a phone number. He said, if you want any body panels, phone this number. So seems a bit
Cryptic.
So we got to the point where we needed body panels. So I phoned this number, and the guy, whoever he was, Fred Blogg, said, what do you need? And I said, well, I need, side panels, bonnet, roof, tailgate, all the bits and pieces. Okay, he said, okay, well, I think it'll be next week. I'll be down with it. So, right, okay.
So this is,
week appeared. Sorry.
so that's John Davenport's mate in Birmingham, just like nicking body panels out the back of Longbridge and trucking them down.
So then the following week, someone shouted, oh, Ian, there's a truck outside. So I go out and there's this massive 40-foot Arctic curtain sider out there. And the guy slides the curtain side along, and there's all these, there's thousands of body panels. And I nearly fell over. I said, what? Ian brought all these? Oh, no, he said, we've got to climb up in the middle. I've hidden them in the middle of these body panels. So we had to climb up over these body panels to get the ones that were in the middle that were free gratis, so that they were brought out. So every time I wanted anything, I had to speak to this bloke, and he'd get it, so he'd drop it off. But it was quite amusing. The way and means of getting stuff wasn't straightforward, that was for sure. But anyway, and then of course, he didn't just bring one set of body panels. I think he bought about 4 sets. So we had body panels all over the place. So anyway, and then we had to cut them all up to get them to fit. So yeah.
To go back to the start a little bit, Ian, just when you seemed pretty excited about the project when Patrick came to you, but for the rest of the team, within Williams, to be working on a project for a dirty rally car to be flung about the forests with abandon, was there any sort of this is Formula One, is this something that maybe is a bit below our pay grade, or was there a general level of excitement and acceptance to the project from within Williams?
No, I think a lot of people were very interested in, because it's all engineering, and all the people at Williams are all interested in engineering. It's just another form of engineering, and we were doing things that we weren't doing in Formula One. And Formula One at that time was very simple. In fact, very simple. The cars, when you look at a Formula One car of that era, there was only 2 mechanics that ever worked on it. But when you look at a Formula One car today, I mean, they're just like Swiss watches, aren't they? They're like jewellery. I mean, they take about 10 people just to work on them. But in those days, the Formula One was fairly simple. So to have a 4-wheel drive car and have the ability to design all the systems that go into it, the gearbox, the final drive, the suspensions and all the rest of the stuff, and the structures, and build a rally car, everybody thought that was really wonderful. And there was benefits as well, because one of the things we needed early on was something to bend the pipes. We needed a mandrel pipe bender to bend the 4130 tubing that we were using for the space frame. So the guy, Roger Tippler, who ran the fabrication shop for Formula One, and went to him and said we needed one. Oh, right, okay. So he went out and he found one. And at the same time, he thought, oh, we could use this for bending aluminium pipes and exhaust pipes. So it was a bit of a spin-off. So it was a benefit to Formula One as well. So they ended up with a machine, but all the actual space frame was bent on that particular mandrel bender, but it wasn't a computer control one. It all had to be done by hand with angles, and get the angles right and get all the bends right. So it was interesting. But no, going back to, I think everybody in Formula One thought it was really exciting, really, really good. There was a lot of interest. We were all trying to keep it secret, but I don't think that worked terribly well. There were a lot of people in there wanting to see what was going on, and there was looking what's going on with Formula One.
I guess quite a lot of this early work we've been talking about would have been conducted in 81, 82, so quite early on in the Metro's development curve, and also quite a key period for rallying, because it was that 1981 when the Quattro certainly realized, showed the way ahead, and four-wheel drive. Were you guys in Williams working on the Metro 6R4 aware of how rapidly the world of rallying was going to develop, or appeared to be moving at the time?
I'd say no, not really.
Mhm.
We were just building, but the only thing I'd say was when the car was actually to a point where they thought it was competitive, it couldn't be announced because John hadn't spoken to the board of directors to tell them what was going on. It was some time afterwards that it was announced, and by then I think the Lanciers had come out and also the Fords had come out, and then suddenly the Metro was announced. Everybody thought, oh well, they've done that pretty quickly, but in actual fact the car was finished before those other two cars were announced. But I think if it was done in a different way, if it was all up front, the Metro would have been announced first, and there would probably have been more development done into it straight away. Possibly it would have been, I don't think it would have ended up as any different, because there was obviously engine problem. There was other problems as well with the car, but they take like all these things, they take a bit of a while to sort them out. But it did eventually get sorted out, and then of course Group B didn't exist anymore. So
yes, I mean, I've heard one of the stories, the mythos that seems to go around is that there was this big flat spot in the torque range between, I think, 5,000 and 6,000 RPM, which no one at Austin Rover could quite ID. And then they finally got a new dynamometer in the end of 1986, just after Group B had been cancelled, and they cured the issue pretty much straight away. And had it been 12 months hither, it would have been transformative. It seems to be almost to sort of sum up the Metro's fortunes.
Yeah, well, I think the person responsible for all that was Cliff Humphreys. He was the engine builder. Mm-hmm. And when Group B finished, I'm pretty sure he set up himself and took that engine and stripped it. And they did find that there was a mismatch, I think, in the crank or the Conrads or something. There was something not right, and it had to be remachined to get that put right. And once he'd done that, and then he turbocharged it, I mean, the Gollop was 750 horsepower without any problems.
Gollop won the final Group B European Rallycross Championship with his in '92. So long after, so the fundamental rightness of the engine can't be denied. Yeah.
So as far as I'm aware, once all the bugs were sorted out, it ended up as an extremely good engine. Ended up in quite a few cars, didn't it? I think.
Yeah, Jaguar XJ220.
Andy
the most
Burton,
famous one. Oh yeah. The initial prototype that John Davenport requested with the front engine V8. Did you guys actually build one of those, or did Patrick straight away shoot down the idea, or did it actually have any bit of build work done at all?
No, and there was no traction whatsoever on that. That was dismissed immediately.
So it did get built and was driven.
Well, not a front engine one. No. Ever considered to be, something that would be good as a rally car. Anything. There's no space in a front engine. Oh, it was crazy. You couldn't put a V6 in the front of a Metro. That was nuts. And to have four-wheel drive. Because obviously he was thinking from the point of view of rear-wheel drive, but you only had to look what everybody else was going to be doing. That would preclude that, and you'd have to say, well, no, four-wheel drive is the only way to go, and the only way to make that happen is mid-engine, power to the front, power to the back. So it was. I suppose Patrick probably scratched his head for about 30 seconds and said, "Oh, you must be joking."
I'm sure he didn't put it in as polite terms as you just did there either.
Well, no, he was fairly blunt in that. They softened up over the years. Yeah.
The size of the Metro must have been an exciting prospect for engineers and mechanics at Williams, in terms of packaging and getting everything in together, it must have maybe been more of a challenge than working on a Formula One car in a way, to try and get all this stuff into a hatchback body, and smaller. If the car was a modern car, it would be much, much bigger, even in that kind of class of vehicle now. But getting all that in must have been, a bit of fun, and quite a nice challenge for you guys to change the pace.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, I must admit. But obviously they've been used to, with Formula One, to packaging everything as tight as you possibly can. So I don't think anybody thought it was going to be too difficult. There's always ways and means of solving the problems. Certainly when it left us, and next time we saw it, when they had all the rest of the gear in it, and I suppose they have all the radios and the stuff that they have inside it, it seemed to be a lot more stuff in there than we'd put in. So it was a pretty compact, must admit. And I think when we built it, we actually, before it went, we had to put side impact bars. I think that was something that was required. So, and it had a wing that they did. Brian O'Rourke suggested that a rear and a front wing might be a good idea. Austin Rover thought that was hilarious. A rally car with wings is, might work in a Formula One, wouldn't work in a rally car. But I think they took it to a wind tunnel somewhere and did the test on it and found it made quite a big of a difference. So it ended up with having a front wing and a rear wing. And I think all these rally cars have got wings now and aerodynamic bits on them, and without them, they're considerably slower. So, it's beneficial. Anything that goes through the air and you can make it work better is worth having. So, yeah.
I believe from my own research, Brian O'Rourke's background, because he was American, I believe.
No, he's not American.
Was he not? Oh, okay.
He worked in America.
I've heard him. Yeah, I think he was doing something with Northup for the Ep8. So wings must have been fairly big at the time.
Fiber, that was his background, really. That was what he was very good at.
Is there any truth in the rumor that some of the Metro 6R4's initial aero was taken straight from the FW06 Williams F1 car? Because I've seen that bandied around a few times.
Oh, that answers that.
I don't think so. I think Brian just sketched something out that would do the job. I mean, at that time, there was no wind tunnel testing done. It was just, did something with this aspect ratio. We'll put that on the front and put this one on the back, and we'll see what happens. And suck it and see. And that's, I think it's pretty much what he did. And it worked. And it wasn't until he got in the wind tunnel that maybe they fine-tuned it. But I don't think there was anything particularly, he didn't spend much time on it. It just happened to have an idea, maybe as something that he's seen from his previous employment. But it was difficult for Brian to get past what people's initial thoughts on, aerodynamic devices on the rally cars. I think he had to push quite hard, and Patrick pushed hard as well to try and get them, because they were not being derogatory, but they were a bit stuck in their ways, because they'd only ever rallied road cars, basically modified road cars, and to suddenly give them something that was fully adjustable on all four corners. In fact, when we gave it to them, I got a phone call and said, "Would you come over and show us how to set the car up? Because we don't know how to set the car up." So I had to go over there and explain what you have to do to get the wheels pointed all in the right directions and the camber casters and all the rest of it. And then equipment made up to enable them to do it. So, and their philosophy was you bolt it together, rally it, and that's it. But the philosophy was changing rapidly. At every stage you take the suspension apart and rebuild it. So it was a bit of a bit of a short learning curve for those guys, but they did a good job. There were some good blokes at Abington, some very good blokes.
And of course, this was a time as well, the concept of the aerodynamics on the Metro were still, years ahead, because, there was a few wings starting to appear in Group B, but, this is a time when a rally car was almost, indistinguishable from its road going counterpart, other than its livery and its roll cage, and it's only relatively recently that, real aerodynamic devices have started to make a full-time impact on rallying. Things appeared here and there, but, even into the bulk of the 90s, such things were limited to, a rear spoiler that was fairly, not a very extreme looking wing. And to have this thing come out of the gates with this big front wing, big rear wing, appendages on the side, very, very different to anything else at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think once Brian sort of proved that there was a benefit, I think the side pods got modified by one of the engineers at Austin Rover. He suddenly thought, oh yeah, this is beneficial. So there was all sorts of ideas. I think a bit of sculpturing in the front wings and airflows, and they started looking at that in more detail to get the air into the radiators at the back of the car, get the air flowing over the car better. So it gave them food for thought.
I believe a chap called Bernie Marcus was the fella in charge of the aero, at least certainly when it was handed over to Austin Rover, because of the wings came quite late in the project. Apparently he was, it set him quite a poser, because initially with the wings on, it redirected all the air sort of through and under the knacker ducts in ways that were never intended. It strikes me as it must have been, well, like you say, a very steep learning curve with the aero, and let alone the fact that all these, unlike many of the other Group B rally cars, these wings were on the production cars from day one in an unaltered form, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I remember. I didn't have much contact with Bernie, but yes, I remember the name. I remember he was doing that, and I think Brian and Bernie used to get together and try and figure out what they were going to do. But I'm not sure there was a vast amount of science in it. Maybe there was a bit later on, maybe, but yeah, the whole thing was driven really a bit by Formula One. There was a bit of reluctance, as I say, that they'd been rallying and we hadn't, so they assumed that they knew more than we did. So you come up against that quite a lot. So there we are. So in the end, it ended up as quite an exceptional piece of kit, really. I remember John Davenport, after they banned Group B, John Davenport, they had all these cars. I'm not sure how many they had. But John Davenport said, do I want to buy one? And I said to him, no, well, how much is it? And he said, I'll let you have it for 10 grand. So at that time, 10 grand was a lot of money. I didn't have 10 grand. Foolishly, I said, I can't afford that. He was sort of umming and ahhing. He might have a bit less. I said, I think I remember the times that I think if it was 5 grand, I probably couldn't afford it. So I didn't buy it. Only I wish I, you think, in hindsight, God blimey, I wish I had.
You're right about it being a success, because it certainly found its level. I think it won 4, perhaps 5 national rally championships in 1986. Obviously the WRC campaign was beset with reliability issues, but Oriol won the French championship. I believe Marc Douay did the Belgian one in his, and various others. So it's not a failure by any stretch of the imagination. Did you follow its career after your hands-on involvement with the car had ended?
I have to say, just out of interest, probably how's the Metro getting on? But by then, the department that I'd effectively set up myself, John Piper he set up his own consultancy business. So he moved on, and Brian O'Rourke went across to the drawing office, and I set up the prototype department, and we were building the new Formula One cars, which at that point was Honda. So we were flat out working on that. So we didn't have a lot of time to think about what was going on with rally cars. And then we heard that Group B was cancelled for various reasons, and thought, oh, that was a bit of a waste of time, wasn't it? And that was, all that effort that went into it and nothing really to show for it. But no, I don't think anybody during hearing that would have thought, like a lot of those cars, they ended up in museums. But I don't know. Metro 6R4, I mean, it's had a life of its own. I mean, when you consider that 40 years ago, and now it's still, I mean, I don't know how much a second-hand one is. It's some ridiculous amount of money, isn't it?
Six figures all day long anyway. Height,
Yeah.
quite.
And it's definitely that the prices of them have definitely gone berserk in relatively recent years. I think there's a new generation who weren't, certainly weren't around at the time, and who've only sort of learned about Group B, through the internet or whatever. And because of that, the prices of them have soared, and the values and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, presumably you must be able to still get spare parts for them. There's probably a few companies around. I know one of the guys that he worked at Abingdon. I think he worked on the gearboxes, or he was a mechanic, a rally mechanic, and he specialised in the gearboxes. He set up his own business in Abingdon somewhere, working on, I think, mostly uprights and gearboxes and final drives. I can't think of his name at the moment, although I did employ him when Williams did BMW Le Mans project. Was that 80? Was that 98, 97?
99, yeah.
I'd phoned him up and asked him what he was doing, and he wasn't doing anything at the time. So I employed him in the sub-assembly section, and he worked on the gearboxes and upright. And I think he went back to doing Metro stuff after all that stopped. So there were some very good people there, and I suppose there must be still people out there working on those cars. And I know they've evolved the management systems on them and all the rest of it. They've probably been improved no end. Electronic systems during those days weren't particularly good. They were very subject to failure. So.
And you were using Lucas presumably at the time, so that must.
Well, yeah. I do remember one of the guys at Abingdon. They were all talking about electronics, electronic ignition and everything, and he was saying that they had when they were running the Vitesses or the V8s or whatever that was, that must have been in touring cars or something. He said early on they were testing it around Oxford, and every time they were at the traffic lights, quite often the engine would die. And it wouldn't start, and then it'd start. And it took them ages to find out that one day when they were out somewhere, a taxi pulled up beside them, and the bloke was on the radio, and the radio waves were cutting right through the ECU and switching it off.
Oh dear, that's the most BL story I've ever heard.
Yeah, so they fixed that. So. Yeah, I think the engines are probably a lot more reliable now because fuel injection's much better and the ECUs are much better and the engine management is much better all round. So they're probably very reliable, probably pretty good. They must be. They're still going like they are.
And the 5-speed box, that was all designed in-house by you guys, right? With John Piper.
Yeah, that was
Mike
John
Endine.
Piper did all that. Yeah, that was Hewland supplied all the gears. The diff was Ferguson diff with silicon inside it, so you could change the slip ratio of it. So that was John Piper. John Piper and Brian O'Rourke, exceptionally good as engineers in their own right, exceptionally good. And Brian O'Rourke, I'm not sure if he's retired, but he's probably still at Williams. He's been there for so many years now, and he's he's a carbon fibre man. If ever you need to know anything about that, he's the guy to ask. But there was an interesting or a little story where we got the engine in and the gearbox was in and started it up and it was running and right, put it in gear. And I think John put it in gear and the wheels went round. We thought, oh, great. And then thought, Patrick said, it doesn't seem right. And what had happened, the gear lever has been designed with the pivot point in the wrong place. So when you went to put it in first, you actually put it in second. So they reversed the gate. So I remember John panicked a bit. He had to go and redesign all that. I think that was the only thing that was wrong with it. That was the only thing that was ever wrong. But yeah, they did a great job of that.
One of the things I've heard the early Group B cars struggled with, at least initially, was getting down to the minimum mandated weight of 960 kilograms. Was that something that you guys struggled with, especially because of the limitations of it being so small? You know, I can well imagine that you had very little room for maneuver, literally, when it came to remounting ancillaries for better weight distribution or anything else. Because if you wanted to keep it inside the confines of a nominal metro shell, you really didn't have many options, did you?
No, not really. I would suppose at the time that must have came up, but because we were building the space frame and then putting steel panels on it, I think at the time, I don't think we were really too concerned about the weights. It was just a prototype we were building to find out if it was viable. I think that's what John Davenport wanted, and what Patrick wanted. And certainly once they found that, yeah, this looks like it's could be what we want to race, they looked at ways and means. They put the aluminium roof on, and lots of fiberglass suddenly started appearing everywhere. So I personally, I got no idea what the thing weighed, no idea at all.
Throughout the development process, then, how much testing, on the road or on stage was being done while you guys still had the car? Was there, at what point were you bringing it to? Was it Cadwell Park? There was testing done amongst other places. And then was there stuff back to the drawing board again? How much testing went on the road during the course of the prototype build?
Well, I don't think there was very much road work. I mean, there was an airfield near Abingdon there that they used to take you to, Tony Pond, and turn up, and then they blast it round the runways and around a bit of a rough area, and they satisfied themselves that everything seemed to be working okay, so they just pressed the button on the program, really. So I don't remember an awful lot of testing. I mean, later on, once the car was what they thought would be suitable to go rallying, they did obviously testing then, but I don't think there was very much in the way of testing being done. Once it left us, it went to Abingdon. We didn't really see it after that. So, that was the end of the project for us, sort of thing. We built the other two and they disappeared as well. And like I said earlier, and we moved on to something else. So, job done, tick that one off and get on with the next thing. So,
was there a sort of definite handover date and event that when Williams and your involvement with the Metro ended and it was passed over to Austin Rover full time?
Wow.
Or did it sort of bleed through and, there were fellas from Williams, working all the way on it up until 1986?
No, no, definitely not. Once we'd finished the three prototypes, once we finished the first prototype and that disappeared over to Abingdon, myself and the other chap, we had to build the other two, but we'd already built one, so we knew what we were doing. So it was only a matter of assembling it. And then I think once we had that shell done, that went to Abingdon and they put all the running gear in it. So that was it. We were out of a job.
off to Honda powered F1 dreams.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. turbocharged F1 engines, so that was the next thing on the list, and something that we had to learn about and understand and build the cars. There wasn't much time to do anything else. I don't think there was any. It was left up to Austin Rover to sort out the problems after that. Once they got the handle on it, they understood what was going on. They had some good people working there, so they sorted it all out. It went rallying.
Wonderful. I've heard there's some, so there are some quite hairy stories from the test program. I know it must have been quite an early car, definitely before the 4-valve engine was delivered in 1985, where Steve Soper filled in for Tony Pond for once at Abingdon, and became the first person to write off the Metro 6R4 in a huge, multi-barrel roll shunt. But I assume you weren't present and correct for that.
No. In actual fact, I'm not even aware of it, to be quite honest.
Must have been used to his Rover SD1 race car, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they were incredibly strong. Incredible. I mean, if you were going to have an accident, it'd be good to have one in the 6R4 compared with a lot of other B-spec cars, because they were like, I don't know, they were like incredibly fragile. Certainly, there was quite a few accidents. There was one where they rolled one. Was it mechanics rolled one down the side of a hill somewhere, didn't they? In Greece, I think. They'd done something to it, and they went out to test it and lost control of it, and then rolled it down the side of a hill, wrecked it, and the two guys got out of it without injury. The car was pretty much trashed. So,
yeah, perhaps I've seen photos of Ari Vatanen having crashed an RS 1700T while testing in Greece, which perhaps could have been that. But yeah, hairy stuff.
No, it was a very strong car. In fact, Michelin said that torsional, they must have gone to Paris and they tested it for torsional stiffness, and they said it was the stiffest rally car they'd ever tested on their equipment, because it was incredibly stiff, because you could imagine the space frame fully triangulated, plus all the panels in there. It was, well, you had to be like that to make the suspension work. You don't want the thing twisting or moving around. So.
I mean, the Michelin link has always puzzled me, because I believe I'm correct in saying that it was initially going to have 13-inch wheels, and the initial rubber development was done with that in mind, and the suspension development. But then come 1984 and 2 full year Group B development, Michelin apparently got in touch with someone at Austin Rover and said, would you like to perhaps upgrade to 15-inch wheels, the same being used by Peugeot and Audi? And I don't know if it was so much an offer as a strong arming. And I mean, you might be able to shed more. I can imagine that must have set development back a few paces purely because of the redesign. I think that's the bodywork.
Well, yeah, there was a bit of bodywork change, and if obviously you know the car well, and you can see that the bits on top of the towers, they were put on there so you could get more travel. So, yeah, there was. I don't know the politics behind that at all. It was just something that happened, and then changes had to be made. And I'm not sure if we actually did anything like that. I think that was probably down to maybe John Piper and maybe Brian O'Rourke probably looked at it and said, oh, what we need to do is add this on. And maybe they got the stuff made somewhere and added them on. But yeah, everybody was running much bigger tyres in those days. I think initially John Davenport was very keen to have it look like an ordinary Metro rather than this wacky racer, because you have to sell it to the board, you see. I think if it was a bit too wild, they would probably thought, what the hell's this?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, Peugeot managed that with the 205 T16, which despite being wild, does have a passing resemblance to GTI. Whereas a Metro 6R4, despite following the same formula, somehow, probably because of that cowcatcher front wing, always looks a little bit more extreme.
It does. It does. Looks like a Pikes Peak car, doesn't it?
Very much so.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose at least, and you were about to leave Williams, prior to the Metro program, but it ended up keeping you there for a good long time afterwards.
Well, it was peculiar, and because I was chief mechanic and I stopped at the end of 1980, they got another chief mechanic officer, Alan Chalice, who had been at Lotus. Now, Patrick employed him because he thought he was, he'd been around for a long time. He'd been with BRM and he'd been with Lotus, and so he thought he would be very good. But it turned out that he was very good at management and management of people, but he wasn't engineering. He wasn't very good at the engineering. So consequently, they were running FW07 with the B, which was without the skirts. So I was doing Metro and going backwards and forwards to Formula One to do sort of engineering on the cars and making sure that that they were right, because they were very reliable cars, but they had to be maintained to a high level. And so I was doing that. So I was doing two jobs really. It wasn't really until they went on to W8, which was DFE powered car with Ketley Rosberg and everything. And then they got the Honda engine. So by then, Metro had finished anyway. So yeah, I was pretty busy. That wasn't intentional. When I thought I'd just be doing the 6R4, but I ended up doing a lot more. So it's all engineering. It's all interesting. So that was the other thing. Another reason that I was getting a bit fed up, because when you're racing and you're at the track, it all sounds very glamorous, but it gets a bit boring because you're doing the same thing week in, week out. You don't actually learn an awful lot. I was always interested in the engineering aspect, so to have the opportunity to work on something that hasn't been done before and put your own ideas into it appealed to me more. So that was another reason I wanted to do something else. But as it turned out, it was with Williams and not some other team. So.
Well, I suppose on that note, Ian, I think you've probably given us a pretty good insight into your experiences with the Metro. So we won't keep you too much longer, but we do appreciate coming on and sharing your stories with us. It's great to get a insight, as I say, from a man on the ground at the time in what was and still is a very interesting project and car. Still remembered very fondly.
Yeah, well, it's no problem. I'm not doing very much at the moment, so yeah, that's good. I mean, the thing is that it's surprising what you can remember all those years ago, really. So,
I mean, I think it's a car that's always held, I think, rally folks' attention for various reasons. Not well, least alone the noise it made, which is like nothing else on earth, but also the fact that it was so tumultuous. That 4.5 years from Patrick Head speaking to the Aston Rover guys at Paul Ricard to the end of Group B. There's so much that goes wrong and right. You've got 3 different mooted engines, various gearbox configurations. The idea that the engine might be in the front for 2 minutes. There aren't many Group B programs that went through quite as many what ifs.
Yeah, well, I suppose it was when it was first mooted, I had this thing in my head that there might be 10 of us working on it, but it didn't work out. There was only 4 of us.
And all the more an achievement for that.
Well, I suppose so, but yeah, we had some good laughs on the way. So yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, and I'm glad to see it's still out there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Mm.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Okay, no problem.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, Ian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. No problem at all. Glad to talk to you.
And with that, episode 8 of Rally DNA comes to a close. It's great to talk to Ian Anderson. I mean, thoroughly interesting chap. To be one of the 4 guys involved in the Metro prototype program, who basically instigated the prototype department at Williams, and to be involved in what was a very different rallying proposition at the time to approach a Formula One team in order to bring this project to fruition. So it was great to hear his stories. Thanks very much for listening, and stay tuned as ever. Bye-bye.